Hey friends, I'm Otis Gibbs, and this is my buddy Gurf Morlix. He's going to talk about his friendship with Blaze Foley.
Was playing in Austin at a little club called the Hole in the Wall. I had this little duo with a guy named Mark McKinnon, who you may be familiar with. I don't know. That's another interesting story. But we were just playing at the Hole in the Wall, and this guy came up to me in between songs, carrying this guitar case. A big, long-haired hippie cowboy guy, cowboy hat on, and just a real weirdo, you know, and he wanted to show me this guitar that he had. He wanted to sell it to me. It was an old acoustic guitar, you know, early 1900s. And he wanted to show it to me in between songs. I'm going, hey, you know, we're in the middle of a set. I'll talk to you on a break. And then I went over on the break and talked to him, and I found out that I liked him. He was funny, and we just kind of became friends. He came by the house, and, you know, of course, Blaze was pretty much homeless the whole time I knew him, except for a little bit at the end when he got a little tiny bit of money. But I found out that he had a gig coming up like later that week in a disco. It was a happy hour set in a disco right behind the Hole in the Wall. And he said, you know, would you come and would you bring a bunch of people with you? And I said, well, I'll see what I can do. And so Mark McKinnon and I went, and you know, there was, you know, 6 or 8 people just kind of sitting around him on stage in this disco, or maybe he was out on the floor. I can't remember, but he was like no one I'd ever seen. You know, he would play these songs, and then he had a valise with him, and he would open the valise and pull out pictures of the person in the song, and he'd pass the picture around and say, here's the person from this song, and then he'd play the song. And it was just, he had weird little toys, and it was just like a weird show and tell kind of a thing. And I'd never seen anyone do that. It was really personable, and I just, you know, I fell in love with his music. Yeah, he had just written If I Could Only Fly. He played that. And I remember he played a few songs that he sort of later stopped playing, but he had written the bulk of the good stuff at that point. And, you know, he had some problems. He had drug and alcohol problems and behavioral problems, and you know, started this long, slow downhill slide into alcoholism and homelessness. And the writing stopped. At one point, he met Towns Van Zant. And, you know, anybody that, when you meet Towns, he was a vodka drinker, you know, or anything really, but he drank a lot of vodka. And when you meet Towns and you get to hang with him, you want to drink with him, you know. It's probably the same as trying to keep up with Keith Richards, you know. It's like, so everybody tried to be Towns, and it killed some of them, and it killed Towns, and it killed Blaze. You know, it was a bad thing. But when Blaze met Towns, that's kind of when it turned into the binge drinking, the vodka and you know, mixed with meth, and you know, stay up for days, and it was really unhealthy. The only times I ever saw him be, well, yeah, it was, you know, he, like on this long, slow downhill slide, he could become vindictive. He'd get a grudge against somebody for a slight, or you know, maybe it was an imagined slight, or maybe it wasn't, you know, but seed would grow, and you know, I saw him be violent a couple times, get beat up, you know. That was pretty sad, but I loved him. You know, I'd haul him out of there and patch him up, you know, and take him home. And when Blaze and Towns were hanging out in bars, you know, it's like I'd spend an afternoon hanging out with them, and we went for lunch somewhere, and it just turned into this drinking session. And we drank in this bar till we ran out of money. Vince Bell was there too. It was me and Vince and Towns and Blaze. And got any money? Nobody had any money. And Blaze and Towns, well, we know what to do. And they just started becoming obnoxious. And they were harassing the waitress, and they were harassing the customers. And I was just horribly embarrassed. It was really awful behavior. And if it was just Blaze, they would just kick him out, you know, bodily, you know, they'd throw him out the door. But it was Towns, so you would ask Towns to leave because he was Towns. And so the manager finally came over, and then Blaze and Towns said, you give us $10, you won't see us again all day. So he gave us $10. So we went to the next bar and drank that money up. And then when that was gone, they did the same thing again. They just turned on the Obnoxo thing, It was amazing. And, they were well versed in it. I was so embarrassed. But I couldn't not pay attention to what was going on. It was too fascinating, It was like a freak show.
How about the kind, generous side of Blaze?
Amazing. And a champion of the underdog. And, if you were his friend, he would defend you to the death. And that's how he died, defending a friend. An old drinking buddy of his who had a son who was a junkie, and he and Blaze had gone around a couple of times about this kid stealing his father's Social Security checks, cashing them and using the money for heroin, and so it just it led to Blaze's demise, and it didn't have to happen, but it sort of did for Blaze, because he would defend you. I had left Austin and moved to LA. I left in 81, I think it was. And that's kind of around the time 80, 81 was when he started his downhill slide. So I would only go to the outhouse when I would come back from LA and have a gig in Austin, and I'd find Blaze. And, I'd just go to the street. I'd know where to find him, and I'd always find him. One time I came back and he had cleaned up. He'd quit drinking, and I said, well, let's test this, So I took him to the outhouse, and I had a beer and he had a Coke or something, and it was good. And then, I got home from a gig one night, and there was a phone machine message, and it was Lucinda, and she said, I got something I want to tell you. I'll call you tomorrow. And I turned the message off and just started crying. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew it was Blaze. I didn't know how bad it was. I knew, I called her the next morning when I woke up and said, what happened to Blaze? And she said, well, he got shot. And I said, is he alive? And she goes, no, he's dead. I wasn't there when it happened. I came back for the funeral, but I wasn't in town right then. The funeral was just chaos, as it should be, And it was about 15 degrees, February 1st or something like that. That's about as cold as Austin gets, It was brutal. And I flew back, and this ne'er-do-well friend of Blaze's picked me up at the airport. I didn't know. I thought another guy was coming for me. And it was this ne'er-do-well friend. He said, well, I don't have a driver's license anymore. I haven't driven in 10 years, but someone loaned me this car. They said, go get you. And I knew the guy. And then we leave the airport, and we get on 35 heading south, and we ran out of gas. He goes, I said, did you look at the gauge? He goes, I haven't driven in 10 years. It's 15 degrees, and we had to walk to get gas, It was chaotic, and then there was a lot of people there. And I sat kind of in the front because I was supposed to be a pallbearer, but I hadn't hooked up with anybody, and so they took care of that. So, but I didn't really get to see who all was there, except they were all behind me. And it was so cold afterwards, we just went right to the car. I did see Towns briefly, but there might have been 500 people in there, or 900. It just seemed like a giant crowd. Blaze had a lot of friends, but he liked people, and he met people, and he would champion them and stand up for them, and so he had a lot of friends. And then they loaded his body into the hearse, and they were going to this cemetery way out in South Austin, deep South Austin, and there wasn't enough money. They had to do a benefit at the outhouse to raise money to get him out of the funeral home, to pay the funeral home, because it was just, none of these people had any money. They're all ne'er-do-wells, And this was, Austin before Austin became Austin, new Austin. So they didn't have enough money to get a police escort or, anything to the funeral home. So, we got in our car and we were like the second or third behind the hearse. I think we were like 4 or 5 cars back. And so heading down South Congress, we come to the first traffic light, and the hearse and like 3 cars made it through. And the rest of, like another 40 cars stopped and didn't have any idea where the cemetery was. And it was just absolute chaos. And so, like the light turns and 8 cars go through, and then the light stops again. And so here's a line of 8 cars. And then, we turn, let's go back, let's do this. And, we're driving back up, and I see Champ Hood and like 8 more cars behind him coming in from a side street, and everybody was just hunting. And I would say, I bet 80 or 90% of the people who were going to go to the cemetery couldn't find it. And, it's just everything associated with Blaze was always all fucked up in a really great way. And this is just very typical, It's like, I found it very funny. He would just reach down and mix things up, because he appreciated the chaos of the situation.
Was there duct tape on the coffin?
Yeah, there were rolls of duct tape. I've heard different stories. People talk about, we duct taped the entire coffin. No, just people were, tearing off. It's like putting an armband on or something. Just tear off a piece of duct tape and paste it to them. And it was so cold. I remember Kimmy Rhodes sang something at the gravesite, and I had never heard her sing before, and it was positively eerie. She's an amazing singer, and just I brought goosebumps on top of my goosebumps from it being 15. I was like,
what would Blaze think if he would have had a vision of the future where there's a movie about him?
Oh man, he would just be amazed. Blaze never even got to tour. He only got to play in the few cities and towns he lived in, he never got to go to Europe. He didn't, I don't know if he knew how good his songs were, I don't think he would have ever thought that John Prine would be covering his song, It's like, it's just, it's remarkable. Now, he knew about Merle and Willie. They had cut If I Could Only Fly. And Blaze actually got a check. He got his first royalty check, and I don't remember how much it was, but he rented a room in a house in South Austin. And the last time I was in Austin before he died, I went there. I found him on the street, and he took me to his house, and that was the time that he was sober. And we went to the outhouse and tested his sobriety, and he was really proud of having a place to live that he was paying for the first time, and he was doing artwork because he was sober, and he had his room decorated with his artwork, and it was really encouraging. And then, like I said, a few weeks later, I got the call.
Is his artwork out there?
It can be found. His sister had some, and it's online. I think it's a lot of bright, swirly color things done with, markers, and it's unique. It surprised me. I'd never known him to do that, Well, he had no touring history. They talked about a European tour. Blaze fucked that all up, He was in such bad shape, he wouldn't have been able to deal with that. When he started the binge drinking he started blowing off gigs because he didn't have a ride, and he would rather stay wherever he was and drink vodka than try to get to his gig that he'd booked. It's like it was low down.